And we're live. Hello, friends. So this is a new one. I don't think that I've ever had an office hours that started with 0 questions. So we'll see um, if anybody jumps in. Yeah, I'll do a little intro and then we'll see if there are any questions. Let me just do one last thing. There we go. So let's share my screen. If you've never been to office hours before, then that's interesting. Yeah, there we go. So if you've never been to office hours before, this is once a week. I give an hour of my time to answer questions from people about whatever issues or whatever you're dealing with. So I'm sorry, just taking my shoes off for comfort reasons, and I am like about an inch shorter without them. I give priority to people who are in the Zoom call, so you can join the Zoom through this link. And then I fall back to Discord questions, but there are none, no Discord questions here. So we'll see. I'll wait like 5 minutes maybe to see if anybody jumps in with questions. If not, that's fine too. I don't actually mind that much. I will mention that I just answered a call on the Call Kent podcast. And so if you want to listen to that, that's fun. And if you are watching this later and you're like, oh, I had a question for Kent, this is a really great place to ask because you typically are going to get an answer faster this way. I am not seeing, if I don't get any questions, that's actually totally fine because I can definitely just switch over to doing my typical live stream. I suppose since we don't have anything there, let's see if anybody jumped on the YouTube and is asking questions in here. I do not typically pay attention to live stream chat. It looks like there's nothing here. So
I can.
Oh,
can
yeah.
I make a question?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't notice you jumped in the Zoom. Welcome.
How's it going?
It's going great. How are you doing?
I'm fine. I asked a question for you yesterday on Twitter, and you asked me to ask it here.
Yeah.
On this one.
Can you remind me what that was about?
Yeah, sure. Here on my team, we have a lot of struggle. We moved to using a React testing library recently, and we have a few questions in how we test some type of components. So in my example, that we have a lot of questions on how to test and what we test and if we should test these components. We have like small components with no logic at all, like that repeat and only for styling purposes on larger components. So like a header component, a description component that had no logic at all. Then we have components that have similar layouts but have some differences between them that use those small components. They are still only visual components, but they use small ones. And then we have a container component that has the logic. They receive props and parse those props to make them what the visual components did them to be, and click handlers and etc. So we were wondering, how do we test this component? Like, do we need to test the small components, visual components? Do we only test the ones that assemble them together? And how do we test the container component? Because it has the same visual that the presenter component. It is just setting up props. So do we need to test those, or how would we test the container component?
Yeah, great question. So the types of things that you're, if we take a step back for a second and just think not about the specific components, but what are you trying to ensure? Like the whole purpose of testing is to ensure that your application functions properly. So unless your application is literally just like I display some stuff, you probably have some interactivity. That's what your container components are doing. And so think about it from an end user perspective and what part of this application would be really bad if it broke. Is it that the header is displayed properly and stuff like that's fine. But like there's probably some more important things like the checkout button actually works and things. And so you're going to cover those lower level components and even those layout components by testing the functionality of your application, or you'll at least render those things. And if it's really, really important for you, you can, additionally, you can have a test that says, okay, the header is rendering proper, or not a test, but an assertion that says the header is rendering properly, the left nav is rendering the links we want it to. The one thing that I really don't like doing as much in my tests is just a test that says it does what it does. Because and you get that type of experience if you're doing snapshot testing a lot, because there's really nothing in the assertion that says the important part of what's going on. It just like, it does what it does. And so if it changes, how do I know that the change is desirable or not? And so you want to avoid tests that are kind of like, it does what it does. So yeah, if you're testing, like if you're doing an end-to-end test of a user flow, like they land on the homepage, then they click on, like if I was to test this, for example, land on the homepage, and then they click on the blog page, and then they go into here and they search for testing, and then we make sure that that gets highlighted properly, and then we make sure that there are, you know, X number of blog posts, and then I can click on this and copy the URL. As I'm doing all of those things, I am rendering these lower level components that I don't really have any logic in them. And so those things are covered. And if you want to, you could add assertions that say, well, the nav is rendered and it has these things, but you don't have to render it separate from or have a special test just for that. I'm not saying that like if I wanted to test this nav, like testing that in isolation, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But it just seems like there's so many things that we could do with our time that are way more important to make sure that they work than just testing that these links are being rendered. And I think often when we make simple tests like that, it's just because we are overwhelmed by the difficulty of testing anything more complicated. So like, this is an easy thing to test, so I'll write a test for that and I'll feel good about myself because I tested it. But it really isn't giving you a whole lot of more value than just doing a more of an integration level test that renders all of the things together and actually interacts with the elements. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. It would be make more sense to test only like maybe the presenter component that uses a lot of tiny bits, because they are so simple that it's like not that relevant. This description has the description test. It's kind of
yeah, exactly. Like
simple enough.
What would your assertion even do if you rendered, like, here I have a header, or here I have these links, like you render it and then like, what does your assertion say? Like there's nothing really valuable there. So yeah, I would definitely render the layout components, and maybe even those I wouldn't bother. I'd just go with the container component that manages the state and stuff that ends up rendering the layout components. That to me makes more sense.
Yeah, on the container component, we can test like if the functions are being called with the correct props. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And
So assuming that container component accepts props for like you know, on input selection change or whatever. Yeah, any API that your component exposes to the user of the component, that can be that's something that you want to assert on. So if there's a callback API, or if there's some sort of you get to choose the chat ID or something like that. There's actually, I've got a blog post a little bit about this called implementation details. Where is it? Yeah, this one, testing implementation details. I'll stick that in Discord here. And then there's also related to this, the test user
have
blog
those
post.
open already.
Oh, okay, sweet. Yeah. Both of those are very relevant to our discussion here.
Sure. And then, so if I don't test the presenter component, I can even test the rendering on the container component. So because if I test them on every step, I'm just gonna make copy and paste everything, because it's the same visual components in different tests. So
that actually, I just posted or answered somebody's question that's kind of similar to that too. Is avoiding over testing or what do I call it? In my common testing mistakes blog post, I've got repeat testing, I think is what I call it. Yeah. So yeah, you certainly wouldn't say, okay, I'm going to render the container component and I'm going to click on some stuff and, oh yeah, let's also make sure we assert on a bunch of this other stuff that my layout is rendering. You wouldn't make those assertions on every test. If it really mattered to you, I would render the container component once and make all those assertions in one test, and then probably do a separate test to test out the interactivity. Normally for me, I actually don't really care to assert on simple stuff like these things are laid out. If it's important enough to make sure that that's rendered in that spot, then it's probably important enough to be interacted with. And so you're going to just naturally get that test. That said, I totally appreciate that if you were to render the blog component, you'd want to make sure that the title is rendered in an H1 or something. So there's nothing scientific about testing. There's a bit of an art, and yeah, there are trade-offs in these things. So
Yeah, it makes more sense to test that because we were considering an answer you gave someone on Twitter, like, you can test the functions and then you can test that the presenter component was called with like it was a function, it was called with and the props, but you could only test the container and already test the visual components there, and you wouldn't need to test the presenter component because they will always be working together, at least on my example. This presenter is always for this container.
Yeah, you'd get that coverage just naturally.
Yeah, makes sense.
Cool.
I think that answers my question. Thank you.
All right, stellar. And it looks like nobody's jumped in with more questions, so that's fine. I have plenty of work to do anyway. So for anybody watching now, I am working on Epic Web Dev. It is a huge, huge undertaking that I've been streaming about for months now. There are months worth of streams on my YouTube channel. And so as soon as I end this one, I'll start up a new one. Right now, what I'm working on with this is putting together a workshop for testing web applications. The early bird discount ends, I think, in 2 days. So if you want to grab the last 19 spots we've got for this, you can grab that. Or if you want to come in person, I think we've sold half of these now. So yeah, there are 25 spots left for the in-person one, and this will be sweet because RemixConf is going to be amazing. We've got just the coolest speakers, super, super awesome. And we actually just announced Dan is coming all the way from London. Can you believe this? He's flying all the way from London for 1 day of the conference because that's all he could spare. But he's doing that. Like, wow, that is so cool of him. Really, really appreciate him coming out to our conference. He's going to give an amazing talk. It's called React from Another Dimension. It's going to be sweet. So yeah, look forward to that. It's going to be awesome. So I hope to see you in person at RemixConf. If not, then you can come to the remote edition of Testing Web Apps, which is going to be great. Yeah, look forward to Epic Web. It's going to be so, so cool. So yeah, with that, I think I'll wrap this up, and I'll start the new stream in just a few minutes. So yeah, thanks everybody for coming. We'll see you all in the future.